welcome to Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. My name is Mariana Cordier, and I am your host. Maryland is rich in opportunities to learn about the local Black history, and our guests today are going to share with us information that is incredible because it's right here in Maryland. My first guest is Rhea Harris. She's a JD with an MBA and a lifelong student of history. And we have Clarence Snuggs, housing and community development expert, and Reynauld Smith is back with us. He's a board member with the Sandy Spring Slave Museum. And so I wanted to start with Clarence, if I could, to talk about what is the theme of Black History Month this year.
Great, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. This year's theme, as I understand it, is Black health and wellness, which I think is very important, especially in the times that we've been through for the past couple of years. So I think that that's a great thing for us to focus on for Black History Month 2022.
And what are some of the challenges that are typical in the African-American community with regard to health? I mean, I know in the Latino community, sometimes it's the ability to afford care.
Go ahead. I think that COVID has shown us that that the healthcare system has some real challenges when it comes to delivery, consistent delivery of quality care, equal delivery across the board. And there is a direct correlation between housing, especially with discrimination, housing and health care or health and wellness. And so, you know, the zip code does matter. And I think that is because it does sort of set people up to be located in certain parts of the county or certain parts of the state or certain parts of the country where there may be large gaps or disparities in the provision of quality health care. You know, we pay enough. We have the best healthcare system in this country that money can buy, but that system is not necessarily consistently delivered and has equally delivered across communities. And I can share some more of that later if you'd like.
Well, actually, let's talk about that. What
Sure.
is so hard for the delivery of healthcare not to be consistent? Why we do other things consistently? Why can't we deliver healthcare consistently to the community?
Well, I think from the lens of housing, you know, discrimination, you know, there's systemic. I mean, it's been there. And the systemic part, the system works. You know, it creates disparity. That's what it was designed to do. And so therefore, because of discrimination on where people can live and the quality of housing that they're able to afford, those things then set families up, individuals up for disparity in a lot of different areas. You know, the obvious one is in the wealth gap because, you know, a lot of folks are not able to own and therefore they can't grow their the equity in their real estate, but they also have disparities in education because of the schools, economic opportunity with jobs, and then one step further with healthcare or health. And so I think looking back on the impact of systemic racism as it relates to housing, where a person can live and the quality of the housing that they can acquire does then have these other results, these other outcomes in healthcare or health and wellness are two aspects of that. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, that yes, we know about the impact on generational wealth, but there is also, I think, an impact on generational health. And that's one of the things that we need to find a way to break that system, that systemic flow, break that system to create greater opportunities. I mean, because we look at things sort of a standalone. We look at the schools, we look at, the health problems, as I mentioned. There's also the psychological effect of being located over a long period of time. I think that's where I'm getting with the generational health, being located in stressed neighborhoods. There are, places where there are not a lot of opportunities, where there's a lot of challenge just to be able to get through life. And those things have their impact too. And then if we go one step further, especially in the African-American communities around the country, there's an environmental piece that goes along with that. and that goes beyond the African-American community, but it's historic with the African-American community, where there are, a lot of things that deal with air quality, the quality of the water. We've seen that going on. And in health, on top of that, it does create a lot of different problems like asthma and diabetes, lead toxicity, and other even leading to cancers that are related to the geography where the zip code where people live. All of those things sort of combine to create some real challenges, but it's all rooted in the systemic racism that's focused on housing, where people are separated and they don't get to the quality of life that they aspire to because of those systemic issues.
Is there anything that, or any legislation or approach that's being taken to address the systemic discrimination with regard to housing?
Well, the Fair Housing Act is over 50 years old. I mean, we've had that out there. The language is there. It's a question of how it's implemented. I would say the first thing that we need to do is we need to be aware of the fact that these things are related, and that it's important to people have opportunity to get decent, safe, and affordable housing opportunities wherever they want to live, and not be discriminated against and limiting their opportunity to be able to move forward. So I think we need to be aware of the situation, and I think this program like this can help people be more aware. I think we need to look for opportunities to break this sort of cycle of pain that exists with the system, to give people an opportunity. When we're looking at situations, we understand that they're related, that these things don't stand in a vacuum, and that we need to solve for the bigger problem. We need to solve to make sure that we're solving the problem by staying focused on it. And we shouldn't accept the problems that we see as somebody else's problem. We are our brother's keeper. We should be aware, because ultimately these things will affect not only the people that they directly affect, but indirectly they affect us all. And it's a part of the overall quality of life. So I think that that's the way that I would go about addressing those things and looking at it more holistic. But it starts with just being aware that it's going on and the impact of it. It's insidious, so we have to find ways of breaking through.
And Rhea, you're, as a lifelong a student of history, your observation with regard to what Clarence was saying, that the systemic discrimination is still going on. It's not over.
Right. And I will say that there are a lot of different states, federal government that are looking into the disparities with housing, with healthcare right now, because it came to light with COVID. And with the pieces of legislation that have passed through Congress this year that President Biden has pushed through, is trying to help people from eviction and trying to help housing and trying to look at, because where you live means what access you have to healthcare, but also what access you have to healthy foods. And so you can't make a healthier person if they're not in a healthier environment.
Right, because healthy food is not cheap.
Right. Exactly. And there are, especially in Maryland, there are spaces that you actually do not have grocery stores that give you fruits and vegetables and fresh meat or anything like that. They actually have trucks that come through parts of Prince George's County to sell these healthy fruits and vegetables to people because they don't have a grocery store in the area.
That's amazing. And it's not easy when you don't have transportation to commute to be able to buy your groceries.
Right.
And the educational factor, talk about that. Why is the educational gap, so wide, and why is it so challenging for us to close it?
Well, a lot of things stem from slavery. And you had a long period of 400 years in which we didn't educate the slaves because the slave owners thought them not to be human. So when we got through all of the fights, all of the wars, the Civil War, which African Americans have fought in every war in this country, but when you got to the point of, okay, let's look at civil rights, when we fought through the 50s and 60s and actually got some educational bills passed in equal access to education, Brown versus the Board of Education, the country started developing what we call affirmative action programs, programs to level the playing field for those people who were disparaged for so long, because you can't be at the same level with the slave owners' grandchildren if you didn't start at the same level.
Right.
Although we completely built the wealth in this country with free labor. Well, freedom is not free, but still, we were part of American history all along. And you can see it coming about now, like with the Supreme Court cases coming up now about affirmative action against Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. But there are Asian students claiming that they aren't getting their fair slots in these two schools because they're going to African Americans for affirmative action, when it's really going to legacy programs and legacy students whose grandfather bought a library or built a church or build a building. They're taking up most of the spaces. So it's really not against African Americans, but everybody goes affirmative action, you think only of African Americans.
Right, right. And you know, this is a good segue to talk about a little bit of Maryland history about Harriet Tubman. You said,
Yeah.
you told me prior that you went to the plantation where she was living and left. And tell us a little bit about that, because that's in Maryland.
And a lot of people don't even know that. And it's so close to us. It's an hour and a half across the Bay Bridge, but it's Dorchester County. And there's actually a federally funded museum out in the Blackwater Refuge where you can start your own self-guided tour to go to her birthplace, her burial place, and you actually ride in these 2-lane roads that are so close to the edge of the water that you start imagining slaves escaping in the middle of the night and walking through this water, not knowing what's around a corner, and it's pitch black. Remember, there were no street lights back in the 18 and 1700s. So you actually feel like you can go back in time and see
That's
that.
amazing.
And
It feels a little bit like a horror story too, because I can't imagine walking through the swampish waters, not knowing what snakes or creepy crawlies are around. And
exactly.
I mean, the courage of those people was amazing.
Yes. But you can put yourself in that place by going on a self-guided tour.
Yeah.
And I love how they have a mural in that is outside of Chrisfield, but there's a mural on the wall where the original museum was of Harriet Tubman, and it's like she's reaching her hand out to the next generation.
That's awesome. And you told me you can get your picture taken, so it looks like she's holding your hand. Yeah, that's awesome. Which is a perfect segue to Reynauld, who's joining us he's on the board of the Sandy Springs Slave Museum. So the audience, you got to remember there's 2 Sandy Spring museums. We're talking about the Sandy Spring Slave Museum. Mm-hmm. So Reynauld, tell us about the funding that you got, well, not you, the museum got from an NFL player's mother about education.
Yeah, I probably am going to put my foot in my mouth by saying this because I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this. But there was a young man by the name of Richie Anderson, who attended Sherwood High School and went on and had an illustrious career playing with the New York Giants, Dallas Cowboys, and other teams. And Richie grew up right in the Sandy Spring area where the museum is located, and his mother has given us a grant to create a program and programs that are children and parent related. And our first effort at that is taking place this month. For every Saturday this month at the Sandy Springs Slave Museum, we have virtual activities going on. Last week on the 5th, we had quilt making, where we had an expert come in and you could virtually get taught and actually practice it at home. On Saturday the 12th, we will be doing inventions and scavenger hunt on virtual. And on the 19th, things I didn't learn in school will be the topic. And on the 26th, there will be a museum tour with our first group being really Sherwood High School and parents And we have had Sherwood High School students from different organizations come out to the museum and tour the museum. Now, I'd like to say one thing in reference to my previous two colleagues. I was just making notes of certain terms that were used: systemic racism, housing issues, slavery, civil rights. Well, all of those particular issues are addressed in the museum. And thank goodness we have museums, because if we live the history, we should tell the history, and we should not leave it to others to do. As you can see what's going on in the country today. The Sandy Springs Slave Museum is located in Sandy Springs, Maryland, and we are open for tours. We're open for private tours. You can contact us, and I'll share that information with you later.
Well, tell us a little bit about, share with the audience what you told me about the artifacts and the things that are in the museum that are original and that people can see and understand, and how impactful it is when you pair it with the history that it goes with.
Probably the largest set of artifacts would be traditional African art and modern African art. We probably have one of the largest collections in the county, Montgomery County. Historically speaking, we also have slave chains, original slave chains, slave weights to prevent slaves from escaping, and all different paraphernalia that are connected with things like that. We have original KKK regalia, so people can actually see the real uniforms. And with all of these artifacts, we have a story and history that goes along with them. We also have manumission papers, wills, correspondence between individuals involving slaves and slavery. And we look at my notes here, that pretty much covers it. I think I'm probably leaving out something.
Well, you know, one thing that I found impactful when I had done one of these tours was how heavy the chains were, and there was a collar that had spokes sticking out of it for placing it on slaves that had tried to escape, and so they're wearing this thing so that they can't escape again. But the sheer size and weight of it was so horrible. I couldn't even imagine putting it on anybody, much less that people actually did that. I mean, it was shocking to me. And so I think that sometimes seeing it instead of just reading about it really brings home, the human rights violations that were ongoing at that time.
Well, it's important to have museums like this, as I said before, because all the issues that we're talking about didn't just begin yesterday. They began hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We're just seeing the results of them today. In regards to Harriet Tubman, we also have an African-American heritage trail that we are developing. There are about 30 panels on the grounds of the museum. Actually, you don't even have to come in to see them. And they're stories of local people on both sides of the individual panels, telling the stories of Black families from the Sandy Spring, Albany area, and their accomplishments through all the odds and difficulties that they went through. And we are in the process of putting this together electronically so that you could walk through the Heritage Trail and it tells you the story of the individual families and people.
It's amazing the great work that the museum is doing and the work that you're doing being on the board. If anyone was interested in, because I imagine like all museums, it's nonprofit and needs support from the community. If someone wanted to donate, support, or volunteer, how do they go about doing that?
Well, we are a 501c3 corporation, so that all donations are fully tax deductible. Our website is sandyspringmuseum.org. SandySpringSlaveMuseum.org. SandySpringSlaveMuseum.org. That is our main website. However, the phone number is 301-774-4066. 301-774-4066. Anyone that's interested in making a donation, becoming a volunteer, or if you have children, if they're interested in getting their SSL hours, their after school hours, their hours for credit to graduate, that is available at the museum also.
That's wonderful. That's great information. Thank you for sharing that with us. Rhea, why is it so hard to share and have the African-American experience taught in our schools? I mean, it's a bone of contention, but there's a lot of history that's not taught in our schools, but that in particular as well. Why?
I think because people are comfortable with hitting the highlights. We talk about the MLK, the civil rights movements. We don't talk about Malcolm X, but we talk about, the things that we are comfortable with talking about. And I think as we go along, people are taught like I was taught. I learned African American history in my household, at my church, at our library. You learn what happened around you, you read books, you learn things. But I think the uncomfortableness now that's developed in this country on this divisiveness now, after a certain president we had, that people are not willing to go with an open mind to the conversation. I've heard more than 100 times, I don't want my child to feel bad about slavery because we were not slaves. Well, we don't want you to feel bad about slavery, but you also don't want to brush it under the rug like it didn't exist. I mean, we don't brush the Holocaust under the rug like it didn't exist. So let's not brush all history, under the rug. We just acknowledge that it happened.
What are some of the things that we can do to help acknowledge that it happened and make sure that, not just our children, but everyone is educated as to what's going on?
I think there are a lot of resources that are available there. There are a lot of children's books at every age, so you can talk to children about what happened in history. But also, too, you gotta open up people's environment to it happen. Like, I think we celebrate Black history 365 days of the year. Like today, I learned about a gentleman named Julian Abel, who built more than 30 buildings on Duke University's campus, including the chapel, but he could never walk into the buildings because he built them at a time, and once they, opened them for students, he wasn't allowed in the building. Black man. So that's history that you can learn wherever you are. You can learn it here in Maryland, in Prince George's County, Baltimore City, Montgomery County, the Eastern Shore, everywhere. And so I think if we take our children to places to learn things, as inquisitive as children are about things, once you open the door, it's like, well, what happened here? Well, who was this? And why not this? Because I know a lot of people know about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad, but do they know about her work in the suffragette movement? And that Black women worked hard to get the right to vote for white women, because they asked white women asked Black women to step back because they didn't think they would ever get the right to vote if they thought they were giving it to freed slaves.
That's amazing that the suffrage movement had that happen, that compromise had to be, I don't think it had to be made, but it was made. Reynauld, I saw that you wanted to make a comment.
Again, this goes back to why we have the Sandy Springs Slave Museum and other museums like this in other communities in and around Maryland. I'm a product of the civil rights movement. I went to school at Tuskegee in the 1960s, and I did all of the stuff you see on Eyes on the Prize. I was there, I was in it, I saw it. If we, as Black people, minorities, continue to wait on public education to teach our story, we'll be waiting a very, very long time. I understand that it's needed, it's there. I understand the pushback against it. I understand that. That pushback against it doesn't even concern me. I'm responsible, I should be responsible for myself. Like I said, it's our history, we should tell the story. So
Right.
places like the Sandy Springs Slave Museum become the refuge for those people. If you cannot get it at one location, that doesn't mean you give up and you just stop looking. Or you have one setback, that doesn't mean you just stop fighting. No.
No, and you're right that nowadays there's a lot of access to a lot of information. Like Clarence, I saw you wanted to make a comment. You're
Just
going to
a
get the
comment.
last word.
Well, I think it's great. I appreciate the other panelists for sharing a lot of great information. I've been to the museum 2 or 3 times, taken people there on tours, so it's really great. I really do appreciate it. I would say that, you know, I'm thankful that African American History Month was created. I think it gives us an opportunity. It was created to really focus on accomplishments. To answer your question earlier, I think African American history is American history, and you can't parse it out. It's part of the journey. I love my country, but it should include all history, and the African American history is a part of that. And you know, somebody once said that those who cannot remember the past are destined to repeat it. And I don't want to repeat some of the things that we've gone through over the last 500 years. It's still a great country, but I don't want to repeat it. And I think the only way we're going to learn from that is to learn it and understand it. And that's really what this is about.
I agreed. I mean, and particularly when things in the country now are so divided and divisive, and people feeling very comfortable to be saying things that are hateful, not to say they are hateful, but they're saying hateful things that have such a detrimental effect on all of us, and really lacks the civility and respectfulness that I think we should all share, to be kind to one another. So I'm Mariana Cordier. We are at the end of the show. We have run out of time. Thank you so much to my guests for such an amazing show, to the audience for watching us, and you can catch us next time. You can also see us on YouTube, and we have a Facebook page. So thank you and good night, everybody.